Great. What I realized is that I tended to do work on how people lie and tell truths to people they know, but really misinformation was a lot about receiving it from people that they don't know, so unknown contacts. So when working in the misinformation space, came to realize pretty quickly that those folks tend to completely ignore what has been done in deception detection, even though they're obviously highly related. And I am going to rely a lot on Tim Levine's work. Tim, nice to see you. We've been trying to bring his ideas from truth default theory to the misinformation space, and I have a new paper coming out that's explicitly doing that. Here, what I want to do is show you some of the major concerns I have about the way misinformation research is being done and conveyed in the media. So we can take from, a lot of deception detection research has shown us that truth bias is this really important aspect of deception in interpersonal contexts. And Tim has shown us with his colleagues that there's this veracity effect where when you have truth bias in place, you get this difference in accuracy where you're going to be really accurate at truths and you're going to be really bad at lies. And the reason is you just keep on saying true, true, true. So when you encounter a truthful message, you're going to be accurate. When you encountered a deceptive one, you won't be accurate. And so this is the veracity effect. If there isn't a truth bias, if people are just sort of 50-50 saying truth versus lie, they're going to perform 50-50 on both. And what was really important in deception detection research, I think, especially over the last couple of decades, and when Tim has been sort of driving this point home, is we need to consider the accuracy for both lies and truths, because a lot of times when numbers like 54% accuracy are reported, it's masking this huge difference that you see on the left side here between lies and truths in typical contexts. And so misinformation research for the first 4 or 5 years, 2016 to 2020, was simply reporting overall accuracy. And this is important for 2 really important reasons. The first is that when we started doing work and bringing this idea of the truth bias into the context of misinformation, we would show people, we kind of created like this deception detection paradigm, but adapted it to misinformation. And so we showed people misinformation or real information, and like these kinds of headlines, and they were asked to evaluate whether it was true or false. And we would then look at how they performed. And here we have detection accuracy, and we've broken it down by whether they were judging fake or real. And we can see that we don't actually see a truth bias in this sort of like kind of mass personal context where they're seeing news in their personal social media feeds. So that truth bias seems to be going away in this context. Now, this is a bit new. People actually do tend to have truth bias in prior work when they were looking at news. And so we started to get concerned that a lot of the discussion around misinformation was actually causing people to be mistrustful of all news that they were seeing. And if that's the case, then this is going to be a really important problem, because there's a lot of new, this is things that you guys know because you're all deception detection researchers. There's a lot of new work out showing that misinformation is a lot different than what we tend to hear about in the media. In particular, there's a lot less of it that most people are exposed to. And there's a pretty general consensus now that although there is a fair bit of misinformation out there, it tends to be concentrated on a small amount of the population. So, for example, most of the people in this room, if I were to get you to go through your favorite news feed, you'd be unlikely to find any misinformation within the last sort of 100 posts or so, almost zero. We do this in our classes here. I do this with larger talks, and we're starting to do a more systematic study of this. But a really great paper by Jennifer Allen and Duncan Watson and their colleagues looked at like 65,000 people's media diets. This is American focused, both on desktop and mobile, as well as TV. And they wanted to take a look at, like, okay, well, how much news is people consuming? And that's the green bars. So up here on this top one is media consumption for 18 to 24-year-olds. Down below is 55 or above. Green is news. So you can see older folks, they're, about 14% of their media diet is news. The rest is entertainment, right? I think we communications scholars often kind of forget that. The top is 18 to 24. They're not looking at much news at all. It's almost all entertainment. But then we can ask this really important question, which is how much misinformation do they have, or are they consuming in their diet? And then you have to squint really hard because that's the red line. And that red line at the very top is 0.15% of their overall media diet. So we've got this huge discussion in society going on around right now about misinformation and how bad it is, and how we really need to, be skeptical of a lot of what we see online, when in fact the amount of misinformation that most people on average are being exposed to. And as I mentioned, it's not evenly distributed. So we're going to have to think about how some groups do this differently. Now, to get back to the point about the truth bias and veracity effect, if we start telling everybody, hey, you need to be suspicious, then what we're going to see is we're going to improve people's ability to detect fake news. That's a good thing, but it only makes up 0.15% of the average American's media diet. So we're improving their ability to evaluate a tiny percent. Even if we think that team is wrong by like tenfold, it's still only a percent or so. If they're wrong by 100-fold, which to me seems unlikely given the quality of the work, we would be improving 10% of what they've been consuming. At the same time, by removing people's truth bias and getting them to be suspicious of everything they see in the media, we're actually undermining their ability to accurately detect credible news. So we're actually undermining their ability to consume and evaluate the majority, and I'm talking 99% of their media diet. And so we're really undermining their ability to evaluate most of what they're seeing. Okay, so that I think is a huge problem. I think actually that's what's taking place, certainly in US discourse. And we're working on a number of studies to look at this. One of the things we're doing to try to counter it is to develop interventions. So this is the last thing I'll speak about. As I was mentioning, not everybody gets exposed to misinformation the same way. Older adults is one example. They get targeted far more than younger people. So if you're over 65, you're much more likely to be targeted and exposed to misinformation online. And for a number of reasons that people are interested, I can talk to later, they also share it a lot more. So older folks are a pretty serious vector for sharing misinformation, in part because they're being targeted so much. So we've been working with some partners to develop interventions that focus on older folks, which I think they need the most help right now, and biggest bang for the buck in terms of reducing misinformation sharing. So we work with this group. It's a non-profit organization here that does media literacy education, part of the Pointer Institute. And they've developed this course to teach seniors, and it's adapted and tailored for older folks' learning style that uses trusted sources for older people. And then we evaluated it. We used the same paradigm that I showed you before, where we show them fake and real before and after, so fake and real headlines before and after, and then we evaluate the change. And what we can see when we look at this is that before, the literacy group and the control group, they were doing about the same at about 70% on false news, so actually doing above chance. But after the course, they improve, so they get better. That's, as I was saying, if we make people suspicious, we're going to improve their ability to fake news, because we can reduce their truth bias in some ways. So we want to see an improvement on fake news. But what we're arguing is that more importantly is when we look across all of them, right? When we separate false headlines from true headlines, we see this separation. So let's just take a look at all headlines. That's where the red line is the treatment group. So they took the course. Before and after, you can see this really nice improvement. And the control group, who just had no literacy intervention, they stay the same. Really importantly is with the true headlines, we see this really large increase. They go from being pretty suspicious of real news to improving up to almost 90%. While the control group changes a little bit, but not nearly as much. That's really, to me, far more important even than their improvement of detecting fake news, which they, as I mentioned before, they improve when we look over at the false headlines. This is critical. I think without deception detection research, all the work that's been done around truth bias and veracity effect, interventions will just report overall headlines. interventions can then just make people really suspicious of everything and undermine people's ability to detect and evaluate real news, which makes up the majority of their diet. So that's one really important thing that I think misinformation researchers need to learn from us in deception detection. Thank you all for the time. And Sophie, over to you for questions.